Hi and welcome. Today I'm going to show you how to overlay any print design onto your stock photography. We'll be using Photoshop and Illustrator to pull in invitation design that I've created into this beautiful stock photography from the SC Stockshop. So let's get started. First, we want to open up Photoshop. We're going to go File, New, and we're going to create an image. We're going to pretend that this image is going to go on my website homepage. And so those dimensions will be very specific to the size of my website homepage banner. If you were using this for a blog image or a Facebook cover page or an Instagram post, all of those sizes will be very different and very specific to the platform you're using them in. So make sure, this is just a little extra side note, make sure that you have a sticky note or a piece of paper where those dimensions are written down and you keep in your workspace so that you don't lose any time having to look up those sizes every time you're creating a new image for your website, Facebook, etc. Let's call this website homepage, home banner, and then we're going to the width, let's do 1100 pixels, make sure that's pixels, anything for web, digital you want to do pixels, and let's do by 500, the resolution can be 72, and then your color mode for anything digital is always going to be RGB. Print is CMYK, but anything digital will be RGB. Everything else looks great. Okay. So now we have our canvas here. The reason I like to start this way and then bring my image, my stock photography into it is so that I have a little bit more flexibility on how the image is cropped and placed within my blank canvas. So what we'll do is we'll go File, Place, and we're going to, what am I doing? There we go, Desktop. I had to find my image. Okay, here we go. This is the SC Stockshop desktop image that is beautiful. So you can see that by having my canvas already here, I have a little bit more flexibility about how I place this image within my canvas. And so I like the way that looks. So the next thing you want to do is place in your design. So you could use this for this tutorial for anything paper specific, and that's what we're going to be using today. So I have this old invitation design that I've used back in the day. So I'm going to just copy. I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to paste it into my website home banner image. Oh, that's funny. It pasted right there into Illustrator. Computer programs are so wonky sometimes. Okay, I'm going to place this in here as pixels since it will be used online. It doesn't really matter to me at this point. A smart object is probably better if you are going to have to scale it at all. But I know that it's going to come in bigger than I need it to be, so I'm going to scale down. So the pixels is just fine. There's three very important things when you're dealing with paper design, when you're bringing in something that you've printed or is used to print into something that is now digital, okay? And so those three things are going to be scale, your white, your color white, and also your shadows. So let's talk about scale. If I left the image just as it was right now, this would not even remotely visually look believable because the scale is way off. So what we want to do is whenever you're bringing an image in is to consider its size in proportion to the other props around it. So I know that this invitation is 5 by 5, so it's just a little bit bigger than half the size of a keyboard. So I'm going to go, that looks about right. Okay. You can see here, I'm going to clean this up real quick. You can see that I have some of these polka dots, the confetti went off of this invitation. And I should have cleaned that up in Illustrator, but I didn't. And so I'm going to just do this and we'll kill two birds with one stone. My scale is right, so let's move on to the color white. Whenever you are dealing with a digital image versus something that you created to be printed, this white is a pure white on this invitation. You'll notice that these whites, to our eye, they read white, but they're all different shades of white, okay? And so we want to make this white look as if it was a part of this image, and so we want that white to match these other whites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the rectangle tool. I'm going to create a square to match the size of this, and I'm going to hold the shift key to make a perfect square. So you can see I've got a little gray box, and before I change the color of this, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to hold the command key and hold this layer thumbnail over here in the layers palette. The little tiny picture is called the thumbnail. So I'm going to click that, and what it does is select my rectangle or my square. And I'm doing this so I can delete those confetti dots. So then I'm going to select my invitation layer. This is getting real tricky, y'all. I'm going to select that layer, and I'm going to do select, inverse, delete, and I just got rid of those dots. But I didn't have to use my eraser tool or anything. It's like perfectly lined up to that square. Okay, so now you can see that we have this gray rectangle. I want this rectangle to match the color of one of these whites. I want it to be a seamless white. It's actually already pretty good, but it was because I was doing this before, I was practicing before. So what I did, I'm going to step back real quick. Here in your layers palette, click on your rectangle layer, so your square layer, and you're going to click color overlay, and then you're going to click the little color box. And now I can choose anything. I can make this color, I can make this square any color I want, okay? But what I really want is to make it match one of these whites. So I'm going to use my eyedropper tool. If it doesn't pop up automatically, you just click the letter I on the keyboard. And then I'm going to select just a bright white right in there. Okay? Do you see how these read white to us? But lots of shades of white. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to change that color just a little bit just so you can see a little bit of a difference. Okay, this one's a really great example. That leaf reads white to me, and look at what color it actually is. Same thing with the saucer. There we go. That's good. That's good enough for this. I think one thing to note is you just want it to be believable. So I changed it to a color on the keyboard just so you could see a little bit of a difference. Depending on what type of screen you're viewing this on, you're not going to see a difference, but I can see a difference. I'm going to go over here in the layers palette, and I'm going to reorder those so that my invitation, I'm going to name it so that it eliminates confusion. My invitation is on top, and then I'm going to click darken, and that's going to make sure that the white reads as white, as the white of this image. So just to be sure that you caught that, what I did was I clicked on this layer, and I went to my layers palette, which is right here. And you can do normal, so you see how that's just a little bit brighter, or you can do darken. Okay, now I'm going to click on the rectangle layer, and I want to add a drop shadow. So our three components of a believable image, so that it looks like we took a picture of that invitation at the same time as that espresso and that cute little scone, is the scale, the color white, and then your shadows. In order for this to be believable, those shadows need to match the shadows of the other props. What I did was I double clicked on that rectangle layer, and then I'm going to go here to drop shadow. And then we have a few different things that we can play with to make it look more believable. So the first thing is the opacity. You want the opacity to match and be similar to the opacity of the other images in their shadows. Okay, that looks about right. The next thing is the angle. This is really important. A lot of people miss this and they just leave it the way it is, the default angle. But as you can see on my invitation, it looks like my light source is coming from up here and shining and casting the shadow this way. But in reality, all these props, the light source is back here and shining this way. And so it's casting a shadow this way. And so we want to make sure that our shadow is going likewise. So what you do is you just spin this around until it gets to about where you want it. I don't see any to the right, mostly above. So we're going to do that. That looks good. And then the next thing to consider is how big you want your shadow, how big, how far it's going to spread, and what size it is. And so again, you're just going to play with it until this looks right visually to you. So you can see that's a drastic example. Here we made the spread big. And then this increases the size of it. You can see here, anything that's laying right on the marble has a pretty tight shadow, and then anything that has like a little bit of a gap or distance away from the actual slab of marble here, the shadow is a little bit more diffused. And so this was most likely would have been shot right on that marble. So we can bring it in just a little bit, but you don't want it to be so obvious that it looks like, hey, I put a drop shadow right on. I'm going to decrease the opacity a little bit. You could do this all day and be overly perfectionist about it, but I don't think that's probably the way to go. I think we all have better things to do than perfect a drop shadow, but I think that looks pretty good. One thing you can kind of see what it looks like with before and after. So go over here in your layers palette and click the FX, the little arrow here is going to drop down what layer effects you have. And so I'm going to just take that off and then put it back on. That looks really good. Okay, the very last thing is to add any accessories that you would have shot with the design that you've brought in. For example, this is an invitation, so it probably would have an envelope. And so for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to grab one from the internet. Don't do that. You should have one that you use if you are selling invitations and shoot it yourself, because right now I'm stealing someone else's photography. So all I did was copy and paste that from the internet. And I'm going to scale it to size. Right now you can see that there's a little bit of extra white on either side of it, and I want to delete that. So I'm going to go over here to my magic wand tool, and I'm going to select it and delete, select and delete, and then I'm going to do Control T and transform it. That's how we can rotate it. I probably forgot to mention that. And then I'm just going to go over to my layers palette and I'm going to put it underneath. Voila, and we're done. So again, real quick, I just want to mention Control T gives us our bounding box and lets you do all of this. Okay? Perfect. Voila, you're done. Looks so good. All thanks to the SC Stockshop. Enjoy!